I drove back from Portland on a Tuesday in late March, 18 days after my sister called me crying from a hospital bed in the middle of the night. She'd had a stroke. Not a massive one, the doctors said, but enough to take the left side of her face and make her words come out slow and slurred for a while. She had no one else. Her ex-husband had been gone for 12 years. Her kids lived out of state. So I packed a bag, told my son I'd be gone a few weeks, and drove 14 hours to be there when she woke up every morning and needed help getting to the bathroom. I pulled into my driveway a little after 4 in the afternoon. I noticed my son's truck right away, parked where I usually park, which I figured was just because he was stopping by to check on the place. I'd asked him to water the plants and grab the mail. What I did not ask him to do was what I found when I walked through the side door into my garage. My workbench was gone, not moved. Gone. The pegboard where I kept my hand tools, all of them organized by size and type the way my father taught me, stripped bare. The rolling tool chest my wife had bought me for our 25th anniversary, pushed into the far corner with a plastic tarp thrown over it like it was something to be hidden. In the center of the garage, where I had spent 30 years building things and fixing things and just thinking, there was a desk. A white one with hairpin legs, the kind you see in the background of Instagram photos. A monitor, a ring light, boxes of what looked like craft supplies stacked along the wall, a small pink rug on the concrete floor. My daughter-in-law came around the corner from the kitchen before I could process it. She had a coffee mug in one hand and a look on her face that I can only describe as braced for impact. "Dad," she said, "you're home early." I wasn't home early. I said I'd be back this week. Right. She nodded too much. "Come inside. Marcus wants to talk to you." Marcus was my son. 33 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room. He was sitting at my kitchen table like it was his kitchen table, which was the first time I noticed the things that hadn't registered when I walked through. A diaper bag hanging from one of the chairs, a baby monitor on the counter, a set of keys I didn't recognize on the hook by the back door. "Dad." He stood up. "Okay. So, we need to talk. What happened to my garage?" He pulled out a chair, gestured for me to sit. I didn't sit. "Okay," he said. "So, you know how Denise has been doing her online business from home?" I stared at him. "It's really taking off." She needed a dedicated space. And we figured, since the garage was just sitting there, and you weren't using it while you were gone. I'm always using it. I use it every day when I'm here. But you weren't here. I set down my bag. I walked over to the tool chest and pulled back the tarp. The top drawer was open and half empty. I opened the second drawer. Same. Where are my tools? Some of them are in boxes. In the shed. Some of them. He hesitated. My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and the garage. She said, "We thought you might want to consolidate. You have so many, and you're retired. So it made sense to, those tools belong to my father." I looked at my son. "Your grandfather carried some of those tools home from Korea. Dad, where are the rest of them?" Long pause. My son looked at his wife. She looked at her coffee mug. I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook Marketplace. Typed in the search bar. It took me about 45 seconds to find the listing. Vintage hand tools lot. Craftsman and Stanley. Excellent condition. Local pickup preferred. The photo was taken in my garage. I recognized the concrete crack in the bottom left corner of the frame. The listing had been live for 8 days. I showed my son the screen. His face changed. That particular expression adults get when they've been caught and know it's too late to explain their way out. Denise thought. I don't want to hear what Denise thought. Those are not her tools to sell. They are not your tools to sell. This is not your house to rearrange. I called my sister that night from my bedroom with the door shut. She answered on the third ring, still a little slow with her words but sharper than she'd been even a week ago. I told her what I'd come home to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have they been living there?" I thought about the diaper bag, the extra keys, the way the refrigerator had been reorganized so that a whole shelf was taken up with baby food, the stack of mail on the counter that was addressed to both Marcus and Denise, at my address. "I don't know," I said. but it looks like a while. I made a phone call the next morning to my neighbor across the street. Hank had lived there for 22 years, longer than I had, and he had the observational habits of a retired detective, which he was. When did they move in? I asked him. About 10 days after you left, Hank said. Moving truck came on a Saturday. I asked Marcus about it, and he said you'd offered to let them stay while you were gone. He said something about their apartment lease being up. I hadn't offered anything. There's something else, Hank said, and I could tell by his voice he'd been holding it. About a week ago, Marcus was out in the driveway talking to the Donovans. I wasn't trying to listen, but I was right there at my mailbox. He told them the house would be his eventually anyway, so they might as well get settled. I thanked Hank and hung up. My wife had died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was here in June and gone by October. After she passed, I'd rattle around in this house for about 2 months before I figured out that rattling wasn't going to work for me long term. So I picked up the woodworking I dropped when Marcus was born, started making things again, took a class at the community center, found people my age who'd done the same thing. The garage became my place. The place where I was still someone doing something. The place where I could hear my father's voice in the way a hand plane sounds on good wood. Marcus had grown up watching me work out there. He knew what that space meant. He'd chosen to do this anyway. I drove to the hardware store and bought new locks. I also called a lawyer named Patterson, who'd handled my wife's estate. I explained the situation. He told me that because my son had mail delivered to the address and had been residing there for more than 2 weeks, it would be cleanest to issue a formal notice rather than just change the locks unilaterally. He also told me to document everything. I documented the Facebook Marketplace listing. I documented the tools I could identify as missing. My father's draw knife, which I'd had for 40 years, was gone. A set of chisels he'd brought back from a shop in Chattanooga in 1971. A brace and bit that was older than I was. Gone. Sold or given away or sitting in someone's garage right now because my daughter-in-law needed a ring light and a pink rug. That evening I sat down with both of them. I laid it out plainly. You moved in without asking me. You converted my garage into a workspace without my permission. You listed my tools for sale without telling me. And you told my neighbors this house would be yours eventually. Marcus started to argue. Denise touched his arm, and he stopped. We're in a tough spot, Marcus said. The apartment lease ended, and we couldn't find anything in our price range. There are 2.5 million apartments in this country. Everything in the area is expensive right now. Then you expand your search area, or you adjust your budget. What you don't do is move into someone's home without asking. We didn't think you'd mind. You didn't think I'd mind having strangers in my garage. I put down my coffee. You didn't think I'd mind my father's tools being sold online? Or did you just not think about me at all? Denise said quietly. We assumed that since you were so far away, and the house was just sitting here. My house is never just sitting here. It's my home. I live here. The fact that I was taking care of my sick sister doesn't turn my home into available real estate. They went to bed without saying much else. I stayed up until midnight at my kitchen table, which was my kitchen table, thinking about the question of where I'd gone wrong. The same question Walter would have asked himself, the same one every father of a certain age eventually asks, sitting in a quiet house thinking about who his children became while he was busy being a good provider. Marcus had never been a bad kid. He'd been distracted, maybe, self-oriented in the way that people raised with enough become. I'd given him too much and required too little, and then one day he was 33 and living in my garage and selling my father's tools. My wife would have caught it 20 years earlier. She had a gift for naming what was happening before it became a problem. She would have sat Marcus down at 16 and said, "This is what entitlement looks like, and it's not what we're building in this family." But she hadn't been here for the last 4 years, and I'd been so deep in my own grief that I'd confused generosity with avoidance. I called Patterson the next morning. Draft me an eviction notice, I told him. 60 days. I want it official. A week passed. I slept in my own room and avoided the garage, which felt like visiting a crime scene. Marcus worked from home some days, and I could hear him on calls in my living room, the one where my wife's mother's china cabinet had stood for 30 years. He'd moved it against the far wall to make room for a couch they'd brought from their apartment, and one of the cabinet doors was cracked where they'd jostled it. On Thursday, I opened the cabinet and inventoried what was still there. My wife had inherited that china from her mother. 24-piece set. I counted 21. I found 3 plates and a gravy boat listed on eBay. Same seller handle as the tools. Located in Ohio. I called Patterson again. Told him to add conversion of property to the documentation. That afternoon, I told Marcus what I'd found. He looked genuinely surprised about the dishes, which told me either he hadn't known or he was a better actor than I'd given him credit for. Denise hadn't told him she'd listed them. She'd apparently been running her little side business out of my garage and my storage shelves for weeks, treating my belongings like inventory. I want them back, I said. Every item. Marcus swallowed. Some of them sold. Then she can buy them back or I'll pursue the value through the courts. Patterson has all the photos. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was doing this. You knew enough to move into my house without asking. You knew enough to tell the Donovans this place would be yours eventually. What exactly didn't you know about? He didn't have an answer for that. I want you to understand something, I told him. This house is not part of your future plans. There is no version of events where I downsize to a condo so you can have it. There is no version of events where I go visit your aunt and come home to a different configuration of my life. What is mine is mine. I spent 31 years working to pay for it, and I would like to spend the rest of my life living in it. Do you understand me? Yeah, Marcus said, quietly. I understand. His mother would be ashamed. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true, and because some truths can only do their work if they're spoken out loud. Marcus didn't argue. He nodded once and walked out of the room. The following Tuesday, I got a phone call from a man named Greg, who said he was Marcus's supervisor at the company where my son worked in project management. Mr. Ellison, I apologize for reaching out this way. I found your number through Marcus's HR file. I wanted to give you a heads up as a courtesy before this becomes formal. I sat down. We've had some complaints about Marcus submitted by a couple of his direct reports. They allege that he's been logging hours on the company system for work he subcontracted out without informing anyone. It's still being investigated, but HR is involved and it doesn't look straightforward. I thought you should know in case this causes any disruption at home. After I hung up, I sat with it for a long time. My son wasn't a thief in the dramatic sense. He didn't break laws for the thrill of it. He just had a very wide definition of what he was entitled to. Someone else's billable hours, someone else's tools, someone else's dishes, someone else's house. It was all the same impulse. If it was available, if he wanted it, if nobody was looking, then it was effectively his. I'd raised a man who had never learned the difference between opportunity and permission. I didn't say anything to Marcus about the call. I let him find out on his own. He came to me 2 days later, looking like he hadn't slept. I've been put on leave, he said. I know. You knew? Greg called me. I told you about permission, Marcus. This is what it looks like when you confuse it with opportunity. Dad, I need to ask you. No, I don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to ask if you can stay. The answer is no. Not because I don't love you. Because you have 60 days, and you need to use them. I spent that Saturday driving the back roads outside of town the way I used to when I needed to think. Past the farms and the old church on Route 40, out past the reservoir where Marcus and I had fished when he was 9 or 10, back when he was still small enough that I could fix things for him that mattered. He'd lost a lure in the cattails and cried, because it was his favorite, the one shaped like a frog, and I'd waded in after it and found it, and he'd been so relieved, so genuinely glad, like it was the most important thing I'd ever done. I thought about my father. He'd given me those tools not all at once, but piece by piece, over years, each one accompanied by a lesson. The draw knife came with a summer, spent making chair legs in his workshop. The chisels came when I graduated from high school. This is how you'll build things, he said. Not things from stores, things that will last. I'd tried to give Marcus the same foundation in different terms. I'd tried to give him an understanding of work and patience and ownership. Somewhere, it hadn't taken. 3 of the tools had sold. I hired a company that tracked online sales and they recovered 2 of them through the buyers, who returned them once they understood the situation. The draw knife was gone. The buyer had already left the state. I accepted the loss. Some things you can't get back. The eviction notice went official on a Friday. Marcus received it, went pale, and handed it to Denise without speaking. She found me in the kitchen that evening. "I need you to understand that I didn't mean for any of this to hurt you," she said. "I don't think you thought about me much at all. That was the problem. We're having a hard time. Everything is expensive, and Marcus and I have been fighting, and the baby. How old is the baby?" She blinked. 7 months. This was the first time she'd acknowledged the baby directly to me. In all the conversations since I'd come home, in all the conflict and paperwork and legal notices, I hadn't once heard where the baby fit into my son's plan, whether my grandchild had a room somewhere that was actually theirs. Where was the baby living? "Before you moved here?" Denise looked at the table. "In our apartment. In the living room. So the baby was in a living room, and your solution was to move into your father-in-law's house without asking. We needed more space. I understand that. I understand why you made the decision you made. I don't understand why you couldn't pick up the phone and ask me first. That's the part I can't get past," I told her. "Not the crowding, not even the tools. As much as those hurt. It's the fact that nobody called me. My sister had a stroke and I drove 14 hours to take care of her, and not once in 3 weeks did my son call and say, 'Dad, we're in a tight spot. Would you consider letting us stay?' He just moved in, and you helped him, and you started selling what was mine." She didn't answer. I think she knew there wasn't an answer. The next weeks were uncomfortable in the way a fracture is uncomfortable. Everything functioned, but nothing was right. Marcus came and went without looking at me. Denise had stopped using the garage after I changed the combination on the side door lock. They cooked meals that they ate in their room. The baby, who I had never been properly introduced to, cried in the evenings. One night, I was sitting on the back porch reading when Denise came out with the baby on her hip. The baby was small and round-faced, and looked at me with that absolute, unfiltered curiosity that babies have. "I'm sorry," Denise said. "Genuinely. I've been sorry since you got home. I just didn't know how to say it without it sounding like an excuse." "It does sound like an excuse," I said. "But I hear you." She sat down in the other porch chair. The baby grabbed the arm of it and chewed on its thumb. "His name is Owen," she said. "We named him after Marcus's grandfather." I looked at the baby. My father's name had been Owen. I hadn't known they'd done that. "I wasn't there for any of it," I said. "The pregnancy, the birth. I didn't even know. We kept it quiet for a while. And then everything happened with the apartment, and we stopped thinking about the right way to do things and started just doing things. I know that's not an excuse. It's not. But I appreciate you telling me." She took Owen inside after a while. I sat on the porch until it got dark. A few stars came out. The old maple in the back corner of the yard, the one my wife had planted the year we bought the house, was starting to bud again after a long winter. Marcus knocked on my study door at the end of the 5th week. "Can I come in?" I told him yes. He stood in the doorway looking older than 33. His leave from work had apparently been extended pending the investigation. He'd been home most days. "I found an apartment," he said. "Dayton, near the hospital, so Denise can be close to her mother. We can move in the 1st of next month." "That's good." I wanted to say something. He stayed in the doorway. "I'm ashamed." I looked at him. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know sorry doesn't cover it, but I want you to know I'm aware of how bad it was. All of it. Moving in without asking. The tools." He stopped. I told myself stories about it, about how you wouldn't mind, about how you had plenty, about how it was basically going to be mine eventually. I told myself things that I knew weren't true, so I didn't have to feel like what I was doing was what it was. "What was it?" "Stealing." He said it plainly. "I was stealing from you. There was nothing to add to that." He'd named it himself, and naming it was the only place to start. "I'll help with the deposit," I said. "On the apartment." He looked at me like he hadn't expected that. "Not because you've earned it," I told him. "Because Owen deserves a real start somewhere. But that's the last time I give you money without an agreement." Marcus, from here on, anything between us financially has paperwork. Not because I don't trust you. Because trust is built on honesty and we're starting over from scratch. Okay, he said. I understand. He moved out on a Saturday in May. Denise and the baby left first with the smaller car. Marcus took the last load around noon. Before he pulled out of the driveway, he came and stood in the garage doorway. I was putting things back in order. Tools I'd recovered back on the pegboard. My workbench reassembled from the pieces they'd stacked in the shed. I'll call, he said. Good, I said. Call before you visit. He nodded. He left. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been since before my wife got sick. I finished organizing the garage, and then I stood in the middle of it and let myself feel what was there. The loss and the clarity of it. The strangeness of missing someone who was still alive, still 20 minutes away, still your son. The grief of recognizing that the relationship you thought you had was not quite the one that existed. I took Hank to dinner that week. Told him the whole story over steaks at the place on 5th Street that had been there since 1978. How are you doing? He asked. Really, better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. That's about right for this kind of thing. I thought about selling, I told him. After my wife. I thought about downsizing, getting a condo. But I kept thinking about the garage, about having a place to work. You made the right call. I think she would have agreed. She always liked having a project. He raised his glass. To staying put. I raised mine. To staying put. 3 weeks after Marcus moved out, I got a call from my sister. Her speech had improved significantly. The doctors were pleased. She was starting physical therapy for the arm. She asked about Marcus. I told her an abbreviated version. She said, "You always let him off easy. When he was small, I know. Claire never had that problem with her kids. She'd raised them the way our parents raised us, with a long rope but real consequences when you reach the end of it. I'd given Marcus the rope and then let him use it to climb wherever he wanted. He called on a Sunday in June, asked how I was, told me Owen had rolled over for the first time that morning and that Denise had cried, which made him cry, which he seemed mildly embarrassed to admit. I told him I was glad. I meant it. He asked if he could bring the baby by sometime. Not to stay, just to visit. I told him to call first. He said he would. I went out to the garage after we hung up. The pegboard was full again. My father's chisels were back in their place. The draw knife was gone and there was a gap on the board where it had always hung, but I'd stopped looking at the gap with anger. It was a reminder now of something different. Of the cost of letting people move through your life without teaching them that things have weight, that things belong somewhere, that you don't pick something up that isn't yours and carry it off without asking. I started working on a cabinet I'd been designing in my head for 2 years. White oak, simple joinery, mortise and tenon, the way my father taught me. Something that would take months to do right. Something that wasn't going anywhere. That was enough. In September, I got an envelope in the mail with Marcus's handwriting on it. Inside was a check for $300 and a folded note on plain paper. Dad, this is the first payment toward what we owe you. I've been going back through everything since we left. Rent we should have paid, groceries, utilities, the tools and dishes Denise sold. I came up with about $18,000. I know that's a lot. I know it'll take a long time. But I want to pay it back, and I want Owen to know, someday, that his father learned how to own what he did wrong. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just asking you to know that I'm trying. I folded the note and put it in my father's workbench drawer, on top of an old photo of him standing in his own garage, 20 years younger than I am now, holding up a chair leg he'd just finished, grinning like it was the best thing he'd ever made. I called Marcus that evening. Got your letter. Pause. And the check. Another pause. I'm not putting it toward the debt, I told him. I'm putting it in an account for Owen. When he's 18, he can use it to start something of his own. But you keep paying it. Every month. Because that's what you said you'd do. Marcus's voice was quiet. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You and Denise and the baby come Sunday. Bring food. I'll be in the garage. He said he would. I hung up and sat in my kitchen in the late afternoon light coming through the window my wife had always said was her favorite, the one that caught the gold hour just right in October. I thought about her the way I thought about her most days, not with the sharp pain of the first year, but with something that had softened into gratitude. She'd given me 32 years of knowing what it looked like when people treated each other well. She'd given me Marcus, for better and worse. She'd planted the maple in the backyard that was turning gold again now, right on schedule, the way it always did. Some things you lose and don't get back. Some things grow when you finally stop ignoring them. Sunday, I'd find out which one Marcus was going to be, but I'd stop deciding for him. That was his work now. I went back out to the garage and picked up where I'd left off.